Our discussion today is going to be around automated no-touch disinfection modality, specifically a multiple emitter UVC disinfection modality. Out of curiosity, anybody in the room currently utilizing UVC as a mode? Anybody at all, or anybody that has any experience? None. Okay. Yes, you are currently or at your facility that are utilizing UVC?
Yes.
Okay. How about vaporized hydrogen peroxide? A lot of that being utilized? Okay, good. Well, let's go through and we'll kind of compare and contrast a little bit. So Surfacide, obviously, I came across the pond. We're made in the Midwest. We're located just north of Chicago in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And all of the automated no-touch disinfection are really aimed at the fundamental issue, which is room turnover, and the pressures and demands of patient flow become very difficult, and the room space to get it adequately disinfected is very, very difficult. If we look at the literature, the best we can find is about 50% of high-touch surfaces are adequately disinfected. What that means is 50% are not adequately disinfected. And that's not a criticism or an incrimination of EVS teams or the housekeeping staff. More and more technology has crept into healthcare. More and more surfaces exist in the space that create a real difficult burden. These high-touch surfaces act as vectors then that carry on and potentially transmit infection from one patient to another. And the literature also tells us that the patient care center or the patient care environment very near to and around the bed is where those infections are coming. Those high-touch surfaces like bed rails, like IV poles, like all of the television monitor, the telephone, those things that are frequently touched by either staff and or patients are the most frequent vectors. There is great evidence, and we'll review a lot of the studies about UVC's effective germicidal impact. It's virtually been proven on everything really other than the prions, but the spore up to and including C. diff, all of the vegetative organisms, and viruses very easily effectively removed. One of the things that creates a challenge for us is the latency or the survival of these organisms for a very long time. So if 50% of the room is not adequately disinfected, the survival or viability of C. diff, for instance, in a dry, open-air environment can be as long as 5 to 6 months. It's, especially in the spore state, it represents a transmission risk for a very, very long time. And many of the others are also maybe not quite as long as C. diff, but viable for a very, very long time. It used to be that we had to kind of spend much time arguing or proving the germicidal effect of UVC, but it's been long understood. UV has been around for a very long time as an air disinfectant, as a water disinfectant modality. It's really just been in the last 8 to 10 years that it's been used for the hard surface patient environment. But C. diff is one of those things that we often use because of its physical composition in the spore state. It's very difficult. It's resistant to the energy of UV. So when we can demonstrate an adequate log reduction or a kill of C. diff, the likelihood is we've eliminated all the other microorganisms because the burden to kill that, the radiation exposure, is the highest for C. diff spore. For virus and others, it's much easier. And this study proves this. This was done at the University of Iowa, but in a 5-minute cycle, we yielded a 6-log reduction in the MERS virus. It's just very susceptible. 6-log translates to what is a virtual sterility level. The FDA in America equates 6-log to sterile or high-level disinfection. So an incredibly high effective kill at a low dose for just 5 minutes. So Let's talk about it a little bit. What we did that's different than all of the others is really just tried to tackle a few of the issues, and we are hamstrung by these issues too. But all UVC, because it's a straight line technology, our biggest single challenge is shadows. So how do you overcome shadows? Because we need to deliver energy to the maximum number of surfaces we possibly can, we deploy a multiple emitter approach. So our system is comprised of 3 towers, or 3 emitters, that we triangulate in the room. And I'll show you later, I have some animations and some videos that actually will show it deployed. But by having 3 emitters, we can come from more angles, and it minimizes those shadowed regions. If you had a single emitter, like all the other UVC emitter systems, they're hamstrung by the line of sight that they're limited to reaching. The next is distance. It's just sheer physics. We leverage distance by having those 3 emitters. We're closer in proximity to more of the surfaces. If you have 1 emitter in the room, inherently there's going to be things that are much further apart. And I'll review that in a little bit. And the third huge factor is the labor, or the efficiency to deploy the technology. Everyone looks at the cost of new technology, and yeah, there is some expense up front, but the real cost over the long haul is the cost to deploy it, the full-time equivalents, or the people and the human element to deploying it. And what we tried to do is make it an automated, single cycle that can allow for the housekeepers to multitask and do other things, so that it reduces the cost of labor and it makes it very efficient in utilizing. Our real goal, though, is it's a direct correlation to total delivered energy and kill. So the more energy we can deliver in the least amount of time to the most surfaces is going to translate to the greatest healthcare-acquired infection reduction. So our real goal is to deliver the maximum amount of energy in the least amount of time, and I would add with the least amount of effort, which translates into dollars. So let's talk a little bit about some of the physics. UVC is just that narrow spectrum of energy within the light spectrum. We looked at, and we had the benefit, we've only been on the market about 4 years, so we had the opportunity to look at all the other potential solutions, pulsed xenon or other broad spectrum UVC. We specifically selected 254 nanometer continuous UV energy because of the slope of the curve. That curve in the lower right represents germicidal effect, and it's a pretty narrow band, right around 254 to 256 nanometers, where it has the greatest germicidal effect. What that kind of translates to is it's like the sharpest knife. It has the greatest effect and efficiency because it scrambles the DNA. In essence, it breaks apart the protein bonds that holds the organism's DNA or RNA together, and it so damages it that it brings the organism beyond its reparative or restorative capacity, eventually eliminating the organism. We talked about shadows. This video actually demonstrates how the power of 3 emitters translates into efficient and shorter cycle times. The 3 emitters, one in a small patient room, one in a bathroom, whereas with a single emitter, to get the equivalence and to eliminate shadows and deliver the same amount of energy, the only way to do that is through deployment of additional labor and additional time to move from multiple positions. So you would have to run it for approximately 20 minutes in one position. Someone would enter the room, move it to position B, run it for 20 minutes, enter the room, move it to position C, and run it for another 20 minutes. While we talk about a 20-minute cycle in a large room space, that's about the highest amount of time. Most patient rooms, a cycle time for an adequate dose is around 10 to 12 minutes. In a large operating theater, probably more like 20 to 25 minutes. And it's really just a function of the distance. The longer the distance, the longer the time it takes to deliver an adequate amount of energy. And that is exactly because of this law, and I don't want to bore you with a physics lesson this morning. Probably haven't had enough coffee for me to keep you awake in that. But simply said, the inverse square law tells us that as the distance doubles, you would think the intensity of the energy would be cut in half. It's not in half, it's the inverse of the square. So it's 1/4. Every time the distance doubles, 1/4 of the intensity of energy makes it that far. Another way of saying that, or flipping it on the end, is it takes 4 times as long to deliver a dose from 1 meter to 2 meters. So what the time to adequate dose is at 1 meter, it would take 4 times the length of time to deliver it to 2 meters. Another thing that we've done to harness and leverage physics is all the other first generation systems are basically delivering energy radially. What we realized is that our system will rotate in 360 degrees, but we encapsulated the back and we parabolically concentrate the energy and deliver it forward. And then we choose from our algorithm and from the technology how long the exposure is in every distance. If some part or the position of a tower is 12 feet from the wall in this orientation, but 2 feet in this orientation, we shouldn't spend the same amount of time because the shorter distance requires much less exposure than does the long distance. So we maximize the energy to all distances from all 3 emitters, but we use brains and technology to keep the cycle time down. The other reason that we parabolically concentrated and enclosed the back is really a lot for markets like the UK, where there are multi-bedded bays. Many rooms, we want to disinfect the whole room, but in a multi-bedded bay or in a ward, we have patient care areas that we want to focus the energy only where that patient care area is, not to the adjacent patients, not to the staff rearward. So our rear covering allows us to just deliver energy forward into a multi-bedded bay area. And I'll show you how that works in a moment. So let me introduce you to the system. This is a brief kind of flyover of the technology and what the system is comprised of. It's controlled via Bluetooth connection by a remote tablet. Our application runs on the tablet and it's continuously talking to our safety sensors as well as to the emitters. Unique logins, everything from that tablet is also up into the cloud, and we're tracking all of the disinfection cycle data. The towers are tall. We made them so on purpose because we want to disinfect the entire room column from ceiling to floor. Many of the first generation systems are lower in stature and driving energy downward. We do have an automated laser room mapping function that can measure the size of the room, and it will take note of all the objects in the room and adjust the cycle time automatically. They're easy to move by our ergonomic halo. It takes about 10 pounds of force to move them in tandem, all 3 connected together. We're utilizing an onboard UVC meter, which is measuring and ensuring that the lamps are at full output so you don't have a false sense of security. When you know you've run the system, we're measuring and monitoring the intensity of the UV. The same reason it's germicidally effective, we want to protect that room. So it's an uninhabited room space while we're running the cycle, and we protect the room with motion and safety sensors to make sure that the room remains unoccupied. Those then link together and join the system together as a single unit so that it can be easily transported and moved as a single group. Just going to fly through those again here. Oop, a little too fast. So, well, only one in our audience today is a UVC kind of current user. In the United States, we are rapidly adopting this as a modality for 2 or 3 principal areas. The first is contact precautions. Any patient under contact precautions when they are discharged, typically they're going to do manual cleaning. We are adjunctive to that. So we do not replace manual cleaning. We are additive and or adjunctive to that. The other is in operating rooms. And many of our customers are during the day doing discharges. There are some that are doing daily cycles in the bathrooms, particularly of C. diff patients. And then most are doing the operating room theaters nightly or at least a regimen weekly. About 320 institutions have adopted Surfacide in the last 4 years, and we learn from that experience. The more our customers utilize the technology and develop best practices, we're extremely collaborative in trying to understand what made it work well so that we can help our next customer. This is a little bit of a sped up version of a OR cycle in the operating theater. So the first thing that will happen is the towers will rotate. It'll take a laser map measurement of the dimensions of the room. Each of the emitters is going to take all the distance measurements. It will then do a near field scan as well to identify those objects that are nearest to each tower so that the tower nearest is prioritizing the objects nearest to it. The algorithm will then run and calculate the cycle time. A lot of our customers will do this during the first 10, 15 days of operation, and then for given room spaces, they'll just run that cycle time for consecutive cycles just to save the few minutes of laser mapping. What you can see though, this is designed to show you the floor to ceiling coverage. In an operating theater particularly, there's lots of objects at heights. There's more and more monitors coming into rooms, there's more booms, there's obviously the overhead lights. And so we want to make sure that we're disinfecting the entire room column all the way from the ceiling to the floor. You can also see how the 3 towers in triangulation overcome the shadows. If we were just in one position, we would be blocked and the energy would not have access to many of the high-touch surfaces. But by having 3 of them, we're coming from more angles to be able to do that. The tablet remains outside the room, so we can't see it outside of the door. There would be a standard like that caution sign with the tablet, and the cycle countdown is always available, and you always know when the room will be ready for occupancy at the termination of the cycle. Each of the doors is actually protected by a motion sensor. They have both accelerometers or gravitometers if they were to move. You can hang it from a door handle, or we can use passive infrared detection. So if there's a passerby, it would sense that, and it immediately will fail to safe and shut the system down until somebody restarts it. I mentioned what we call the scrub cycle, which is a contained or a focused disinfection. So we utilize the onboard laser mapping by choosing goalposts, if you will, a right and a left margin. And rather than rotating in 360 degrees, all 3 emitters for a period of about 7 minutes are just going to oscillate back and forth to those user-selected start and end points. This is the mode we would use in a multi-bedded bay or in a Burns or in a post-op PACU area. Royal Manchester Children's Hospital has been using Surfacide here in the UK for just about 2.5 to 3 years. And they're doing literally dozens of cycles each day in exactly this mode. In the multi-bedded bays and wards, they start and stop where the patient screen or the curtain ends, and the energy is only going from one corner of the screen to the wall to the other corner of the screen to the wall, and we're disinfecting the entire bed and all of the equipment in the forward portion. No energy is going rearward. If we were oriented here and that was a live system, we would be safe. There would be no radiation exposure to the rear or to the staff because all the energy is being focused forward. Very quick 7-minute cycle, 2 to 3 minute setup time, so we can do turnovers in about 10 additional or incremental minutes as an adjunct to manual cleaning. While we are still a very young company, there is a lot of literature out there on UVC disinfection. We're trying to amass more and collaborating with lots of centers. We do have about now 10 or 12 peer-reviewed published papers, and I'll just highlight a couple of them. This one is out of the Shriners Hospital Burn Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. And really, this study is a simple environmental kill study. What they did is they did cultures in positive culture kind of growth before EVS came in, or environmental services or housekeeping. And they found that 91% of the surfaces were colonized with some sort of, only I think it was 7% were pathogenic, which is good. However, 91% of the surfaces were colonized. They allowed their housekeeping team to then go in and do their normal cleaning regimen. And just like we cited earlier in the literature, in this case, 47%, about 50% of the surfaces that were supposedly disinfected were still colonized. After that, they ran a surficide cycle, and of those, only 8 or 10.3 were colonized of all the surfaces in the room they sampled. However, it was a complete elimination of all pathogenic organisms. So from 320 cultures, positive after UVC were only 8. However, pathogenic was 0. So this study showed that 97.5% of surfaces were effectively disinfected with UVC as an adjunct to cleaning. We do always advise and recommend that it's used as an adjunct or after manual cleaning. One of our customers, the Ohio State University, wanted to just test it a little bit. So they did a test and studied what happens if I didn't do manual cleaning. Where is the kill? And so this is on one of the most difficult organisms. On the left was gram-negative and gram-positive, and you can see that virtually all of them went from high counts before to less than 10 or a no detect afterwards. On the right is the bathrooms with C. diff, and you can see all but one went to a virtual no detect, less than 10. So while we know that manual cleaning physically removes and makes things cleaner, and it allows for the biofilms and the organisms to be better accessible by the UVC, it does work even absent the manual cleaning. We would always recommend it is adjunctive to the manual cleaning. This just shows another environmental study. It shows in a couple of the floor corner, the floor under the bed. This was really them trying to figure out what about those most difficult, hard to reach areas. So the floor in a corner is a very far away kind of remote location. An area under the bed is a difficult spot because of shadowing. So the authors were trying to look at, okay, the most difficult, the hardest to reach spots, what was the effectiveness? And you can see in the logarithmic scale to the left, the very highest would be a 6 log, which is a high-level disinfection. We virtually made that on everything. However, you can see C. diff with heavy soiling represents the hardest kill. It just does. And so the way that we can accommodate for that is adjust the cycle time to deliver more energy to increase the kill. However, on MRSA, on KPC, on pneumonia, you can see that UVC is highly effective in a very, very short cycle time. This study comes out of Jersey Shore University, and what you would probably, or at least I didn't equate Cowdies and Clabsies as environmentally related infections. Their MICU, the intensive care unit, was above benchmarks for all of the Clabsy and Cowdies, and they wanted to intervene and take action against those. So they brought in a surficide system into the intensive care unit. It was dedicated to that floor. This is a large 1,000-bed teaching center with a very high patient turnover. And for the first 3 months, it was complete eradication of any Cowdies or Clabsies. And the team there, the infectious disease team and infection prevention team, were thrilled with the results. And they said, wow, that's fantastic. Let's start using it out on the floors, and let's start using it in other locations. And so their intentions were good. However, it relaxed the use of it in the ICU. And guess what happened? Their cowdies and clabsies came back. So their team dedicated a system, one to the ICU and several to the floors. And for the next 4 consecutive months, when this paper was published, there were again 0 infections. This actually is going to be presented at ID Week next year. And you can see there is the continued curve after they brought it back in both their cowdies and their clabsies. And the data will be shared there. This is one of our very first customers. They began using, and again, they were having issues with C. diff, Clostridium difficile. We have mandated reporting. We call it the National Healthcare Safety Network in the United States. So every hospital is obligated to track and report their C. diff numbers. This was one of the bottom 10 hospitals in the entire state of New York. And what's important as we look at literature, particularly with UVC, really all things infection prevention, we know that things are a bundle. So I'm not here telling you that I have the magic pixie dust or that UVC is the magic sauce. It takes a bundle. It takes good cleaning. It takes good antimicrobial stewardship. It takes all of the other practices. But when you hear these companies tell you that theirs is the difference or theirs is what made it, read in the fine print. What were the other changes? In this study, the only thing that did change, and maybe it was that they were at the tipping point, was that they utilized and deployed Surficide in a combination of all the other things that they had tried in the previous year or two. In the first 12 months, nothing else changed other than their addition of Surficide. They reduced C. diff by 41% in the first 12 months. They looked at a cost and the direct cost, so none of the fuzzy soft dollars, in the actual added cost by additional length of stay, pharmacy, bed blockage, all of those. In that 1 year in C. diff alone, they avoided the cost of $1.4 million. So in a technology that cost roughly $100,000 in the first year in C. diff alone, they recouped that investment about 14-fold. Plus, we know they also avoided MRSAs and other infections as well. They weren't only using it on C. diff. We just measured the C. diff reduction. And those results are not rare. This is a small community, 300-bed hospital in northern Wisconsin. They, too, were struggling with C. diff, and in the first year after deploying Surficide, they reduced their hospital onset C. diff by 89%. We have large bodies of evidence of similar type results. MedStar is a large network in the Baltimore, D.C. area. It's 12 hospitals, Georgetown University, National Rehab. We just literally last week completed their first year of usage. And in their reporting across 12 hospitals, somewhere just under 11,000 beds in those 12 hospitals, their system-wide reduction in infections after 1 year was 38%. So 1 year of use across a wide integrated healthcare network, they reduced 38%. So the technology does matter, and we have the benefit of being kind of one of the late comers, so we could observe all of what the first generation of technology, including VHP, including UVC was, and incorporate and try to come up with a better model. What we've really learned is that it's not just delivering a technology, dropping it off on the door and saying, there you go, we'll train you on what button does what. It's collaborating and coming up with protocols. What is your scope? Where are your problems? What is your main area of concern and focus? We then put a scope around it, develop an SOP, and then we monitor and track to that. And so our technology inside of that tablet, well, a Bluetooth connection and a Wi-Fi cloud-based, it sounds like a bunch of technology gibberish. What that does is gives us a scorecard to gauge each other on and use it as a report card. We track every usage of every room, cycle times, And then we can add it with whether it's with Cerner or with Epic or any other EHR, we can link in that data and create customized and automated reporting that will automatically report to the infection prevention team how often has it been used, where has it been used, and how did that correlate to reductions of infections. So it's much less about, well, it still is about the technology. More and more, healthcare is about metrics, reporting, and tracking and tracing, and then correlating it to results. Is the view worth the climb? Did we get what we wanted, and are we utilizing it where we intended to utilize? We also then can measure additional potential uses. So if we have a list of priorities and we have excess time and capacity, we know where we want to use that next, and we can measure utilization by the same metrics that we will track how much manpower was used, how much UV runtime in every day, and we can see where there's excess capacity and identify the next location to use it. So what we are really doing is just creating some objectives, identifying our next objectives. We track those, communicate and collaborate together to make sure we're doing the right things, and then we review our progress. These are some of the dashboards that are automated. Each administrator will have access to this in the cloud live. You can literally just say, in the last 30 days, where has it been used? What were the cycles? Was there a failure or a success in those cycles? That helps to identify either ongoing training needs or additional resources or manpower to be tracked to it. I'm an Excel freak. I love pivot tables, so we created our cloud to basically be a prioritized pivot table. You can sort on whichever of those parameters you like. You can then set up a distribution list and a file format type, whether you want it in Excel or HTML or PDF. You choose the recipients and you choose the frequency to which that report is automatically created, and the system will blast it out to that distribution list. So many of our customers, will do so on Monday mornings or Friday afternoons. I want to have an email every Monday when I come to work, what ORs were done last week and how often, what was my compliance. If I have 18 operating theaters, were all 18 of them done every day? And you'll actually see that in a report. And every Monday, when you come there, you can check your surface-side compliance. In other areas of my contact precaution discharges, did it correlate? If I had 18 contact discharges, how many cycles did I show of surface-side in those rooms, and what was my compliance comparative? There's virtually no spot in the hospital that we haven't been used. Locker rooms, bathrooms, public spaces, ERs, virtually all types of patient care areas, treatment rooms, diagnostic rooms, executive offices, virtually everywhere. But the main areas, as I mentioned before, operating theaters, contact or isolation rooms, very, very frequently, and treatment areas, particularly where there's an exposure to either C. diff or MRSA. So I believe that is going to do it. We wanted to talk about and make sure you were understanding how the multiple emitter approach reduces shadows and overcomes that, how we leverage the distance and the proximity, how the validation and the reporting is so important to minimizing the time and the interruption of deploying the technology and using less labor. But really what we're about is better outcomes in healthcare. That's why we all do what we do.